In this video, we're going to talk about the impact of natural selection on populations. And so we'll talk about the role of populations and natural selection as it relates to evolution. Charles Darwin's theory of natural selection was based on two key observations. The first was that of overproduction. That when organisms are reproducing, they often produce more offspring than could possibly survive, more offspring than there are resources for. And all species tend to produce excessive numbers. This leads to a struggle for existence, a competition for resources. The second observation is that of individual variation. Not all individuals in a population are exactly the same. Heritable variations exist amongst individuals. For example, looking at this population of ladybugs, we can see that there's variety in the redness of the color. We can see that there's variety in spot number and spot shape. Now, it's not necessarily true that this will cause some of these individuals to survive better than others, but it is possible. Charles Darwin's conclusion from his observations was that of this concept of differential reproductive success, that some organisms are going to produce more offspring and therefore be more highly represented in future generations. Those individuals with the traits best suited for the local environment leave behind more fertile offspring, and the makeup of future generations will be impacted by this process. And we can actually see evidence of natural selection in everyday life. Examples of natural selection include pesticide resistance in certain insects, the development of antibiotic-resistant bacteria, and also drug-resistant strains of HIV. These are all situations where organisms are changing based on selective pressures that are placed on them. Now, it's important to realize that it's not the individual who evolves over their lifetime. Instead, it is the population. The population is the unit of evolution. So how do we define a population? Well, a population is a group of individuals of the same species living in the same place at the same time. This is the smallest biological unit that can evolve. Now, it's important to realize that a population is different than a species. It's possible that a species could be made up of several different populations. In order to be a population, the individuals have to be in the same place at the same time. So, a population is specifically a group of individuals of the same species, which is distinct from another group of individuals of that same species. Now, if a species is threatened with being endangered, it might be that there's only one remaining population of that species left. But for most species, we do have more than one population. An example of populations, you could have the same species of pine tree that is present in a forest on the east coast of the United States, and that same species could be present in the forest on the west coast of the United States. We would call those two different populations because they aren't exchanging pollen, they aren't exchanging seeds, there's no genetic connection between them. Now, through human intervention, taking genetic material from one population and putting it to another could potentially cause genetic exchange, but naturally and normally, those populations are isolated from each other, so they are separate populations even if they are of the same species. It then leads to an interesting question. As humans, are we made up of multiple populations or just a single? And I would say in our past, we had more isolated human populations that gave rise to genetic and ethnic distinctions between different people groups. But with the invention of worldwide travel, our separate human populations are now becoming a much more single global population. There may still be some isolated populations, but we're much more connected now than we were even 100 years ago. Population genetics. Is a field of study focusing on populations as the evolutionary units. Looking at what genes and alleles are present in that population and at which frequencies, we can see changes sometimes over the course of several generations. So a population geneticist tracks the genetic makeup of population over several generations. When we look at a population, individual variation abounds. But it's important to realize that not all of this variation is heritable. Only the genetic components of variation end up being relevant in this process of natural selection. In this particular image, we're looking at 4 different snakes that happen to be of the same species. Even though their coloration pattern is very different, this species is said to be polymorphic. So a population is said to be polymorphic for a trait or characteristic if 2 or more different morphs or forms are present in noticeable numbers. So again, the different coat patterning of this snake, we would say that the coloration of this snake species is polymorphic. Where does variation come from? How is it that individuals are different from each other in a population? Well, it turns out there are multiple sources of genetic variation. So both mutations and sexual reproduction produce genetic variation. Mutations, as we've discussed previously, are changes in the DNA of an organism. And if this in turn changes the instructions for making a protein, that organism might have different traits or characteristics because of that change. Likewise, sexual reproduction shuffles alleles during fertilization, sometimes causing combinations of alleles to be present in a single organism that hadn't been found together previously. And so these are sources of genetic variation that can then be acted on by natural selection. In our next video, we'll talk about the mechanisms of microevolution.